All right, let's tackle one of history's greatest and, let's be honest, most mind-bending mysteries. How in the world did the ancient Egyptians, without any modern machinery, build monuments so enormous they can literally be seen from space? For thousands of years, we've been stumped. But what if the answer has been hiding in plain sight this whole time?
So let's start with a really provocative question, because the real secret of the pyramids might just be the complete opposite of everything you were ever taught in history class.
And that leads us to an even crazier thought. What if fundamental building blocks of the pyramids weren't actually stones at all? To really get to the bottom of this, we first need to take a look at the stories we've all been told, from the really wild myths to the official theory that just about everyone knows.
Okay, so you've got some, let's call them entertaining theories. You've heard them, aliens zapping the pyramids into existence, or maybe even giant pharaohs just tossing these massive stones around. And while they're fun to think about, we can pretty much set those aside. All the mummies and coffins they've ever found, all perfectly human-sized. So yeah, no giants.
So, let's move on from the myths and really dig into the official story, the ramp theory. This is the one most of us learned in school. But when you start to look at it with a scientific lens, the whole story, it just begins to crumble. You know the classic explanation. It goes something like this. Workers transported these massive stones all the way from southern Egypt. They built a gigantic dirt ramp that snaked around the pyramid, and then they dragged those stones up on wooden rollers using ropes. On the surface, it seems plausible, doesn't it? I mean, it's the version we see in all the movies and textbooks. But this is exactly where the theory starts to collapse under its own weight, literally. Yeah, because the moment engineers and physicists actually start to crunch the numbers, the ramp theory begins to look, well, impossible. The physics simply do not add up. First off, just think about the scale. To get a ramp to the top of the pyramid at an angle that humans could actually manage, that ramp would have needed to be 10 times larger than the pyramid itself. We're talking about an absolutely colossal structure. And here are the real deal breakers. A simple dirt ramp, it would have just collapsed under the weight of a 70-ton stone. And the wooden rollers, they would have splintered into dust under that kind of pressure. But maybe the biggest problem of all, if a ramp that massive ever existed, there would be some trace of it left behind, right? Well, archaeologists have found none, zero, zilks.
So if the ramp theory doesn't hold water, what does? This brings us to a really revolutionary idea that turns this entire mystery completely on its head.
This is the core question, the one that has stumped historians for centuries. Without any modern cranes or heavy machinery, how did they pull off this incredible engineering feat? The answer is so brilliantly simple, it's almost hard to believe. What if they never lifted the stones at all? What if they were actually created right there on site, poured into place, just like modern concrete? This theory, championed by researchers like Joseph Davidovits, suggests the Egyptians weren't just incredible builders, they were master chemists. They may have created a kind of ancient concrete by mixing local clay and minerals into a slurry, pouring it into molds, and just letting it harden into blocks. Blocks that are indistinguishable from natural stone, and maybe even stronger. Now, I know this might sound like a pretty wild claim, but it's actually backed up by some really compelling scientific evidence that's been found inside the very stones themselves. So, the first major clue actually came about when researchers were scanning the pyramids trying to find hidden chambers. Their advanced imaging tools started sending back these bizarre, inconsistent readings that made absolutely no sense for natural limestone. The only logical explanation for these strange readings was a really high moisture content. The pyramid blocks held a ton of water trapped inside them. Now, natural stone from a quarry, it's bone dry. But you know what's not? Man-made concrete. It traps water as it hardens. This was the big aha moment. This discovery is what really pushed the scientist Joseph Davidovits to put the theory to the test. He identified all the raw ingredients, all stuff that was readily available in ancient Egypt, and he was actually able to recreate the process. He successfully produced these large, durable stone blocks that are just like the ones in the pyramids. So the whole process would look something like this. You mix the ingredients into a liquid slurry, you carry it up in buckets, which is way easier than hauling a 70-ton block, then you pour it into molds right there on site and you just let it harden in place. No heavy lifting, no massive ramps, no splintered rollers, just brilliant, practical chemistry. So what does all of this mean for how we understand one of history's absolute greatest achievements? To be clear, this isn't being presented as the final, absolute, case-closed answer. You know, science is always evolving, but among all the competing
competing ideas out there, the poured stone theory is by far the most logical and the most scientifically supported explanation we have today.
Ultimately, no matter which method they used, one thing is just undeniable. The ancient Egyptians possessed a level of scientific and engineering knowledge that is still just staggering. They weren't just moving rocks. They were potentially master chemists, creating a material that has endured for millennia.
So the solution to one of history's greatest puzzles might not be brute force, but brilliant chemistry, which leaves us with one final thought. What's the great mystery? That one burning question that keeps you up at midnight.